Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and in this video we're going to be talking about yet another unusual black hole that was discovered relatively recently, but one that creates a lot more questions than answers. We'll talk about a newly discovered supermassive black hole in a galaxy far, far away that doesn't seem to make much sense, but nevertheless exists. Let's talk about this, and welcome to What the Math. So this particular black hole that was discovered is a little bit strange, but before I explain to you why, let's briefly talk about the creation of stars and planets, because all of this does sort of relate to the discovery. So this right here is a typical protoplanetary disk, or basically a baby star, a star system that's about to create its actual star and actual planets. Normally they form within only a few million years, and will eventually resemble something similar to our own solar system. This of course happens everywhere around us, and for the most part looks somewhat similar. As a matter of fact, here are actual images from several such systems in our own galaxy. So this is something that we know goes on pretty much everywhere, and this is how we usually can infer how many new stars are formed in the nearby space. And although for this particular image, usually we use things like infrared detection, specifically the infrared light that will be very, very unique to these types of systems, at much farther away distances we'll usually use the so-called ionized carbon. So this is actually an image that was taken by the Hubble telescope of the really famous Orion Nebula that's basically famous for the Orion's belt and for large stars like Betelgeuse. So this right here has a lot of the ionized carbon atom emissions, suggesting that a lot of various stars are being formed right now. And it's essentially what's known as a star nursery, a place where new stars are being generated and created from dust and from various materials in those nebula. And this right here is a telltale sign of new stars being formed. So if we look really far away, like for example a nearby galaxy, we'll normally not really see as much infrared light, or at least we're not going to be able to use infrared light to discover new star formation, but we can use ionized carbon to try to find out how many new stars are being formed in various galaxies. And that's kind of how we've been able to discover how many stars are generated far, far away. But in this new particular study that was recently published by this wonderful person, actually discovered something a little bit unusual. So unusual that it might force us to recalculate certain things we took for granted. So first of all, this PhD student actually got lucky enough to travel on this beautiful airplane Sophia that has a telescope inside of it. And by using this wonderful telescope, she looked around 5 nearby galaxies with active black holes. In other words, galaxies that had very powerful central regions, so-called AGNs or active galactic nuclei, that were producing a lot of radiation that was relatively easy to detect. But one of these galaxies, the galaxy known as HE 1353 1917, that looks somewhat like this, was exhibiting something a little bit unusual. It seemed to have a lot of these ionized carbon emissions that are often associated with planetary or star creation, but coming from right here, the center of the galaxy, somewhere we don't really expect it to see. And the only reasonable explanation that the scientists could come up with is that the jet itself must be positioned in this way as opposed to being perpendicular to the galactic plane. In other words, it sort of looks like this instead of looking like this as it normally would. And because the jet is essentially sideways and is blasting into the galactic plane itself, it's causing the carbon to change into ionized carbon and is basically changing the nearby areas around the central black hole. So in other words, what we're observing is not really the creation of new stars as we thought, but it's the activity of the jet itself as it strikes various gases in the system, blasting them with a lot of energy, and this causes the effects we're observing, while at the same time generating a lot of questions, such as how did it get like that? What's happening with that black hole? Why is it spinning on the side and not perpendicular to the galaxy? And most importantly, are there a lot of other galaxies similar to this which may create similar effects of carbon that we've misidentified before? Maybe the galaxies where we thought a lot of stars are being generated are not actually that. Maybe it's just, once again, a similar type of a black hole where the jets are blasting inside the galaxy. And I guess a much scarier question is our galaxy like that too? Are the jets in our galaxy facing the inner part of the galaxy? In other words, even though we know that our own black hole is currently not particularly active, it's barely emitting anything, if one day it does become active, is the jet going to be pointing somewhere into the center? Is it going to be pointing at us? Now, the chance of that is really, really low, but nevertheless, we do need to study these effects and we need to understand how these black holes become like this. Because remember, the power of the astrophysical jet of a typical supermassive black hole is ridiculous. For example, these emissions from the famous M87 black hole, whose picture we took early in 2019, are really, really powerful. This is really long. This is about 8,000 light years long. Maybe not as far away as Earth is from the central black hole, because the distance to Sagittarius A star, the central black hole in the middle of our own galaxy, is about 26,000 light years. But nevertheless, if this was pointing toward us, we would probably not be around. And so it is a very unusual discovery and does seem to create a lot of questions. And so it is a pretty interesting, pretty unusual discovery that creates some unusual questions for us. A few other things discovered here was that approximately 75% of all of the ionized carbon emissions were essentially created by the black hole, not by formations of stars. So this is an extremely powerful event that's generating a lot of energy, ionizing huge amounts of carbon and creating huge emissions that would make this galaxy not particularly friendly to life. Especially because the amounts of total radiation created by this black hole are increased dramatically simply because the astrophysical jets are pointed at the galactic plane. But this galaxy is exceptionally interesting now, mostly because we would really like to know what actually happens in the center. Does this ionized carbon then lead to creation of new stars? Maybe after this galaxy is no longer as active, all of this will result in a sudden explosion of various stars being formed. Because, for example, we recently discovered that certain black holes, if they blow their astrophysical jets in a specific direction, do actually encourage creation of stars. And the way they do this is by creating a kind of a vacuum region where gas cools down really quickly, and that allows stars to form exceptionally fast, faster than usual. And although this galaxy does create a bit of a problem for scientific research, because it essentially showed us that sometimes what we think are the creation of stars is really the effects of a black hole, at the same time it allows us to finally understand what exactly do those astrophysical jets do to a galactic plane. Now, because this is a recent discovery, we don't currently know, but I'm sure follow-up studies will answer that question. But most importantly, by studying the centers of these various galaxies out there, we'll hopefully get to understand our own much better. Our galaxy does seem to be peculiar, exceptionally quiet, not very active, and possessing very specific features that I've talked about in a lot of other videos. And what made it so unique is important for us to understand. Not because we want to actually know about the galaxies themselves, but because we want to understand how is it that our galaxy seems to have intelligent life, us. By establishing these unique features that allow for planets like Earth to exist and to create complex life, we'll one day be able to find other galaxies out there that could also have something else. Someone like us maybe? Anyway, until we discover more, that's all I wanted to mention in this video. Check out the paper I mentioned in the description below and come back tomorrow to learn something else. If you've enjoyed this video, maybe support this channel on Patreon. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow, space out, and as always, bye bye.